The story begins not in a grand palace or a military academy, but in the bleak, impoverished streets of Vienna. A young, fiercely stubborn young man wanders through the crowded alleyways, his pockets completely empty and his mind boiling with a growing sense of rejection. He had arrived in the cultural capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire with grand dreams of becoming a legendary painter, only to be rejected twice by the Academy of Fine Arts. Sleeping in crowded homeless shelters and selling cheap, painted postcards just to buy bread, he began to project his personal failures onto the world around him. In these dark, formative years, his mind absorbed the aggressive pan-German nationalism and vicious anti-Semitic conspiracy theories floating through Vienna's tabloids. He began to view life not as a collection of individuals, but as a brutal, unforgiving Darwinian struggle between races. This early psychological fracturing laid the foundations for a lethal ideology that would eventually consume the entire European continent. When the spark of the First World War ignited Europe in 1914, the aimless wanderer found a terrifying sense of purpose. He volunteered for the Bavarian army, eagerly exchanging the chaotic uncertainty of poverty for the rigid, violent structure of the Western Front. Serving as a regiment messenger, he spent years running through the mud and artillery fire of the trenches, earning medals for bravery while developing a strange immunity to the horror around him. To his fellow soldiers, he was an eccentric, intensely lonely figure who never complained about the squalor and preferred to lecture them on politics rather than join in their casual conversations. The trenches became his true home, a place where extreme violence was normalized and absolute obedience was demanded. In October 1918, a British gas attack left him temporarily blinded and hospitalized in Pasewalk, deep in a state of physical helplessness. It was in this hospital bed that he received the devastating news that Germany had surrendered, an event that broke his psyche completely. The German surrender of 1918 was viewed by the highly decorated soldier not as a military defeat, but as a cowardly stab in the back. He wept bitterly in his hospital bed, convinced that heroic frontline soldiers had been betrayed by a shadowy coalition of socialists, communists, and Jews back home. This stab-in-the-back myth, Dolchstoßlegende, became the central obsession of his life, fueling an all-consuming desire for vengeance against the new Weimar Republic. Returning to Munich after the war, he remained employed by the army as an intelligence agent tasked with infiltrating radical political groups. His life changed forever when he walked into a small, poorly lit beer hall to investigate a fringe group known as the German Workers' Party. Instead of merely spying on them, he found himself deeply captivated by their extreme nationalist, anti-communist rhetoric. When he rose to speak, his voice possessed a strange, hypnotic intensity that stunned the small room, revealing an extraordinary talent for public speaking. Within months, the obscure military informant transformed himself into the absolute leader of the rapidly growing National Socialist German Workers' Party. He abandoned his army duties entirely, dedicating every waking hour to perfecting the art of mass psychological manipulation in Munich's packed beer halls. His speeches were carefully engineered theatrical performances, beginning with long, tense silences before escalating into screaming crescendos of pure rage and grievance. He weaponized the intense economic suffering of the German public, providing them with clear, easily identifiable scapegoats for their misery. He spoke not to the intellect of his listeners, but directly to their primal emotions of fear, pride, and resentment. The party adopted the swastika, designed striking paramilitary uniforms, and formed the Sturmabteilung, SA, to violently crush any political opposition in the streets. Through sheer force of will and an unhinged belief in his own destiny, he turned a fringe movement into a dangerous force. By November 1923, Germany was spiraling into chaos due to hyperinflation, with citizens needing wheelbarrows of near-worthless cash just to buy basic groceries. Believing the weak democratic government was on the verge of collapse, the fanatical party leader decided to launch a violent revolution. Mimicking Mussolini's march on Rome, he and his armed stormtroopers surrounded a massive Munich beer hall, firing a pistol into the ceiling and declaring a national revolution. The next morning, he led a march of thousands through the streets of Munich, expecting the police and the military to instantly defect to his side. Instead, the state police opened fire on the marchers, killing 16 Nazis and instantly scattering the crowd in a humiliating defeat. The leader fled the scene but was quickly captured, arrested, and put on trial for high treason against the state. The failed coup appeared to be the absolute end of his radical political career, but he would skillfully turn disaster into a triumph. The treason trial of 1924 did not silence the radical agitator, instead, it provided him with a highly publicized national stage. Sympathetic judges allowed him to turn his defense into hours of uninterrupted political speeches, broadcasting his extremist ideas to millions across Germany. Sentenced to a remarkably lenient 5 years at Landsberg prison, he served only 9 months in a comfortable private cell filled with gifts from followers. During this brief confinement, he dictated the first volume of his ideological manifesto, Mein Kampf, My Struggle, outlining his dark vision for the future. The book explicitly detailed his plans to eliminate democracy, destroy the Jewish population, and conquer vast territories in Eastern Europe for German living space. He realized that attempting to overthrow the government by raw force was a tactical mistake that would always align the military against him. He vowed to destroy democracy from within, using the democratic process itself to legally seize absolute control of the state. Upon his release from prison, the party leader found a stabilized Germany where economic recovery had significantly dulled the public appetite for radical extremism. For several years, his party remained a minor, widely mocked political force, struggling to gain traction in regional elections. Everything changed in October 1929, when the U.S. stock market crashed, triggering a catastrophic global depression that hit Germany harder than almost any other nation. Within months, factories closed, banks collapsed, and over 6 million German citizens were suddenly plunged into unemployment and poverty. The moderate Democratic coalition government proved entirely paralyzed, unable to agree on any effective solutions to the escalating human misery. The fanatical dictator in waiting seized this moment of national despair, telling the desperate public that he alone possessed the strength to fix the country. His message was simple, aggressive, and highly appealing to a population that felt entirely abandoned by their democratic leaders. During the critical elections between 1930 and 1932, the Nazi Party revolutionized political campaigning through the innovative use of modern technology. Backed by the brilliant propaganda mastermind Joseph Goebbels, the party leader became the first politician to extensively fly across Germany by airplane. His campaign slogan, "The Führer over Germany," carried a powerful dual meaning, presenting him as a literal savior descending from the heavens to rescue his people. Massive rallies were organized with meticulous precision, utilizing dramatic stage lighting, booming brass bands, and sea-like forests of swastika flags to overwhelm the senses. Propaganda posters were tailored to appeal to specific demographics, promising jobs to workers, high prices to farmers, and stability to the wealthy middle class. The party leader brilliantly avoided detailed policy discussions, focusing instead on producing an aura of absolute strength, unity, and dynamic action. As chaos filled the streets, his party rapidly expanded to become the largest political faction in the parliament. Despite their massive electoral success, the Nazis never achieved an absolute majority in a free election, and by late 1932, their momentum was fading. The aging president, war hero Paul von Hindenburg, deeply disliked the party leader, famously dismissing him as a vulgar bohemian corporal who could never be trusted with power. However, traditional conservative politicians grew increasingly terrified of a violent communist revolution breaking out among the millions of unemployed workers. Led by the ambitious former Chancellor Franz von Papen, these elites devised a highly cynical plan to offer the Nazi leader the chancellorship. They believed that by placing him in a coalition government with a conservative majority, they could use his massive popularity while completely controlling his actions. On January 30, 1933, the trap was sprung, but not on the person the elites expected. The fanatical leader was legally sworn in as Chancellor of Germany. The conservative politicians genuinely believed they had boxed him in, entirely failing to realize they had invited a wolf into the house. Just 4 weeks after taking office, a catastrophic event provided the new chancellor with the perfect opportunity to dismantle the democratic system. On the freezing night of February 27, 1933, the Reichstag building, the grand seat of the German parliament, was suddenly engulfed in massive flames. A young, mentally unstable Dutch communist was found inside the burning structure and arrested, allowing the government to claim a revolution was beginning. The chancellor immediately went to the scene, declaring the fire a sign from God and demanding absolute emergency powers to save the nation. The very next day, he convinced the panicked President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree, indefinitely suspending all fundamental civil liberties. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to public assembly were instantly abolished across the nation. The secret police began arresting thousands of communists, socialists, and political opponents without charge, throwing them into hastily constructed concentration camps. With his political opponents locked away or terrorized into silence, the Chancellor demanded Parliament pass the Enabling Act of 1933. This critical constitutional amendment granted his cabinet the power to enact laws without the approval of Parliament or the President, effectively ending democracy. Through a combination of raw intimidation by armed stormtroopers and false promises to Catholic politicians, the bill passed by a crushing majority. Within months, the new regime launched a policy of Gleichschaltung, coordination, forcibly bringing all aspects of public and private life under Nazi control. All rival political parties were officially banned, independent trade unions were dissolved, and anti-Nazi newspapers were permanently shut down. The judiciary, schools, and cultural institutions were systematically purged of anyone deemed politically unreliable or racially undesirable. In a matter of months, a fragile democracy had been completely transformed into a highly centralized, totalitarian police state. By 1934, only 2 forces in Germany remained outside the Chancellor's absolute control: the millions of radical SA stormtroopers and the traditional German military elite. The leader of the SA, Ernst Röhm, wanted to replace the regular army with his own militia and demanded radical anti-capitalist economic reforms. The professional army generals made it clear they would never support the Chancellor unless the violent, unpredictable SA was completely reined in. Sensing a threat to his position, the Chancellor ordered the SS, his elite black uniformed bodyguard led by Heinrich Himmler, to execute a bloody internal purge. On the night of the Long Knives, June 30, 1934, hundreds of SA leaders and old political rivals were dragged from their beds and summarily executed. A few weeks later, President Hindenburg died, allowing the Chancellor to merge the offices of President and Chancellor into a single title, the Führer. Every soldier in the German military was forced to swear a personal oath of absolute obedience to him, setting the stage for global slaughter.